An oil tanker ran aground today off the nation's northernmost ice-free port, Valdez, Alaska.
One of the worst oil spills in U.S. history brought Americans images of blackened beaches, dying wildlife, outrage, and betrayal.
Every aspect of our lives since the Industrial Revolution has been determined by oil. The 19th century was a period of rapid change and industrialization. With this rapid change, we needed a fuel that was lean but efficient enough to keep up with the demands of factories and construction. As populations grew bigger, the American people were hungry for oil as well. The black gold that had infiltrated the lives of the American people became the fuel of the world. We used gasoline for cars, running machinery, transportation, and energy, with the United States being the #1 consumer of oil in the world, using 18,840,000 barrels per day. There is a high demand for oil imports. The U.S. Energy Information Administration said the United States relied on net imports for about 40% of petroleum that we consume in 2012. Just over half of these imports came from the Western Hemisphere. Our dependence on foreign petroleum has declined since peaking in 2005. With Exxon being the 4th biggest oil company in the world, there is a high demand for oil shipments.
One of America's most magnificent waterways is blackened and befouled tonight by the biggest oil spill in American history.
240,000 barrels, 11 million gallons of Alaskan crude oil escaped from the huge vessel.
However, on March 23, 1989 was the day that Exxon ruined the Gulf of Alaska forever. The Exxon Valdez ran just along the Bligh Reef at 9:12 p.m., resulting in 10.8 million gallons of oil in the Gulf. This was the second largest oil spill in the United States history. The tank was owned by Exxon Shipping Company, and captain at the time was Joseph Hazelwood. After the spill, the tank was then towed to San Diego, arriving on June 10, 1989. Repairs on the tank began shortly after June 30, 1989, which cost about $30 million to fix that 1,600 tons of steel that was removed by the Bligh Reef. The tank was repaired by July in 1989. Exxon Valdez appeared in court to be told that the jury gave them $287 million for compensatory damages and $5 billion in punitive damages, but Exxon Valdez appealed the punitive damages. The Ninth Circuit Court then lowered the punitive damages to $2.5 billion. Exxon ended up spending $2.1 billion for the cleanup effort.
We're 9 hours after the wreck, and there was not a speck of promised recovery equipment on the water. This had all been promised within 6 hours, and we were 3 hours past 6 hours, and nothing.
The Exxon cleanup took about 20 years to clean up. About 10,000 workers, 1,000 boats, and 100 airplanes and helicopters, also known as Exxon's Army, Navy, and Air Force, were a part of the Exxon Valdez cleanup. Some techniques they used to clean up the oil from the ocean was high-pressure water, mechanical, and biomediation. Workers used high-pressure water method by spraying high pressures of either hot or cold water onto the beaches. The oil would then float to shore, allowing workers to either scoop or suck up the oil. The mechanical technique was used on some beaches where workers would pick up the oil without any type of tool. Lastly, the bioremediation method was used if the oil wasn't too thick in certain parts of the ocean. They would let the oil sit and let the microscopic bacteria grow to eat the hydrocarbons.
The main victim from the oil spill was the wildlife, specifically animals living near or in the water. From the oil spill, about 35,000 birds and 1,000 sea otters carcasses were found, but there are predicted to be thousands of more animals that were killed from the spill that were not found. Injuries to animals affected from the spill continued for some, while others are fully recovered. Some ways wildlife died from the oil spill is when oil gets on the fur or feathers of the birds and sea otters. It destroys their insulation ability. This causes them to die from hypothermia. Also, they will sometimes mistakenly eat the oil while cleaning the oil off their fur or feathers, or when scavenging on dead animals. The oil is poison to the birds and mammals, which causes death. Oil also impacts the wildlife in ways that does not lead to a quick death. For example, damage of the liver or blindness. Impaired animals are not able to compete for food or protect themselves from predators. Oil also affects animals in non-lethal ways, such as not allowing to reproduce.
The oil spill affected not only wildlife and water chemistry, but the happiness and livelihood of the people of Alaska who got a living from fishing and recreational revenue. The personal stories from the Exxon Valdez spill are an insight as to how this completely shifted the lives of the people who live near and around Bligh Reef in the Gulf of Alaska. The people of Alaska and the Exxon Valdez faced serious stress in the workings of the oil spill cleanup. Most of, or almost all, the workers who helped clean up the oil are now dead, according to SalemNews.com. Not only were these workers stressed, but they were exposed to serious contaminants that humans are not supposed to be around. According to a CNN report, the average life expectancy for an Exxon Valdez oil spill worker is 51 years old, which is nearly 27 years fewer than the average American. There were many steps that had to be taken and a lot of the area that needed to be cleaned up. Life halted for the people in Alaska, and they ultimately had to adapt to this oil-covered lifestyle during the time of the cleanup.
Joseph Jeffrey Hazelwood was an American sailor. He was the captain of Exxon Valdez during its 1989 oil spill. He was accused of being intoxicated, which contributed to the disaster, but was cleared of this charge at his 1990 trial after witnesses testified that he was sober around the time of the accident. His first ship was ESO Florence, homeported in Wilmington, North Carolina. Hazelwood climbed the ranks of the merchant marine until he obtained a master's license at age 31. High winds damaged the ship's masts, including radar and radio communications antennas. Though the crew was prepared to abandon ship, Hazelwood rallied them and guided the ship to safety. In 1987, he became the alternate master of Exxon Valdez, which subsequently received Exxon Fleet Safety Awards for the year of 1987 and 1988. Hazelwood's driver's license has been suspended or revoked 3 times by the state of New York for alcohol violations since 1984. At the time of the Exxon Valdez incident, his New York State driving privileges were suspended as a result of a driving under the influence arrest on September 13, 1980. He entered a rehabilitation program in 1985 at South Oaks Hospital in Amityville, New York. Following rehabilitation, he received 90 days of leave to attend Alcoholics Anonymous, but it is not clear if he attended during that leave. The ship maneuvered out of the outbound traffic lane in the traffic separation scheme to avoid icebergs. Following the maneuver and sometime after 11 p.m., Hazelwood departed from the navigation bridge and was in his stateroom at the time of the accident. He left third mate Gregory Cousins in charge of the navigation bridge and able seaman Robert Kagan at the helm with instructions from the third mate to return to the southbound traffic lane in the traffic separation scheme at a prearranged point. Exxon Valdez failed to return to the shipping lanes and struck Bligh Reef.
Joe Hazelwood appeared on the state news in Alaska on the 25th anniversary of the spill. He offered his apologies with a message to the people affected by the spill, saying, "An apology for the ship that I was in command of disrupting their lives, wreaking havoc on it, that I hope that their lives have achieved some sort of normalcy now," Hazelwood said. "I mean, that's all I can say. I can't offer any more. You know, it's 25 years ago. People forget." Hazelwood says he still thinks about the animals affected by the spill. "It was sickening. I mean, you don't want to see anything suffer like that," Hazelwood said. "It was just terrible, and there's no other way to describe it." He says it's the birds seen in the footage at the time covered in the oil, but struggling to fly, that he remembers most. "It's distressing to watch," Hazelwood said.
Judging by our radar, I will probably divert from the TSS and end up in the inbound lane if there's no conflicting traffic. Over.